Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for waiting on us. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you. Yeah, I'm a team member at Girls Human Rights Hub. And today I'm joined by Safi, the co-founder of Girls Human Rights Hub, and Celeste on delivering the first session of the Girls Human Rights Hub Virtual Work Experience Program. Now, as you know, the Girls Human Rights Hub Virtual Work Experience Program will take place from 4 to 8 August 2025, with daily sessions designed to provide participants with hands-on learning opportunities in the fields of girls' human rights advocacy. Now, over the course of the next week, it's going to be a full hands-on week. Participants will engage in expert-led workshop, practical assignments, and interactive activities. We will simulate real-world advocacy work, a day in the life of a barrister, what's girls' human rights legislation entail, and everything on that's related to this. Now, this fully online program will offer a unique chance to develop valuable skills, gain insights into the day-to-day work of human rights advocates, and connect you with a global community committed to advancing girls' human rights, all from the comfort of your own home. I'm joined here by Celeste Greenwood. She's a barrister at Exchange Chambers and the director of our Mini Hubs program. She's a human rights lawyer and activist recently returned to practice here in the UK in family law, specifically in public law children cases. She was called to the bar in 1991 and in 2011, having reached the pinnacle of junior work in her field, decided to follow her dream to work overseas in the international human rights field. Since her return, she has seamlessly picked up to her practices as a highly respected and very sought after. I'm sorry. She brings a wealth of experience, including experience garnered in the criminal jurisdiction, augmented by her overseas experience, a feminist and human rights-based approach, intellectual rigor, and passion. Celeste serves as a director of a young expert program and used to direct, and now with our Mini Hub program, leading the strategic vision and direction of the initiative. Thank you so much, Celeste, for joining today in opening this new program that we have here at Girls Human Rights Hub. Safi then will continue with the co-moderation in the end. I would appreciate you do a lot of the questioning. Feel free to ask on the chat box whatever you might feel. This session, I want to share that will be recorded. We will do, to let you know about a bit of the format, we will do then, after 1 hour of the presentation, we will do a 30-hour assignment where Celeste will deliver you the assignment. We will go into the 30-minute break where you would have the time to do the assignment. And then we will continue back on giving you 30 minutes for your reflection time. The floor is yours, Celeste, and we are all ears to the introduction to girls' human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilvana. Good morning, everybody. I can't see anybody else, so I'm hoping that if you have any problems hearing me, you will put something in the chat or let Ilvana know. So let me just explain what we're going to try and do today. 1 hour to try and tell you about girls' human rights. I'm sorry, that's in the way, isn't it? Let me see if I can move that down. There we go, that's better. Thank you. 1 hour to try and tell you about the legal framework is a bit of a tall order. So I hope that you will forgive me from the very beginning that this can be nothing better at this stage than a whistle-stop tour. So what I'm going to attempt to do is to take you basically through an overview of the human rights framework, the international human rights framework, then talk about those key documents that give rise to girls' human rights, so where we actually find them, so that when you want to be advocating for them or using them in your work, you know where to go and look for the legal background to what it is you want to say. And of course, to try and signpost you on your journey. What you will see is I put some resources. I stopped because the resources could have been another 30 slides. They're just some key ones, hopefully, to send you in the right kind of direction. And of course, if you want more and struggling to find them yourself, you can let us know. So without further ado, let's get cracking. So what are human rights? In a nutshell, sounds like a stupid thing to say, but they are the rights that each one of us has just because we are human. So as they say, it says what it does what it says on the tin. Now, famously, she may not have been the first person to say it, but Hillary Clinton back in 1995, and I think it was the Fourth World Platform on Women's Rights, said women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. So I'm one of the people that's borrowed that from her. And what we're going to say, because it's true, is that human rights are girls' rights, and girls' rights, of course, are human rights. So that's our basis. That's the moral, if you like, philosophical basis. Now, what about the ethos of human rights? Where does that actually come from, or what are the key factors to it? Well, if I can make this work, the first concept is that we are all born equal in rights. Now, I guess here that the important thing to emphasize is in rights, because of course we're not all born equal in terms of the family that we're born into and its wealth, its level of education, and so on. But the one thing that does make us all the same, the great equalizer, if you like, is that we are all equal in having human rights. Next, this is very much based then on the respect for the dignity of the individual and each other. So one of the phrases that we're going to come to, I think it's next on my list. No, come later. Let's have a look. Yes, is this magic phrase, respect, protect, and fulfill. Now, that is a phrase that we talk about in terms of the state's duty or its position to each of us as individual human beings, as girls, as women with rights. Respect essentially means that the state, so your country, your government, shouldn't do anything that impinges on your ability to exercise your rights. Protect means it has to take active steps to make sure that your rights, as it says there, are protected and you can use them. And fulfill requires your state, your government, to think about measures and policies, subject, of course, I'm afraid, to financial constraints, but think about what policies might be needed, what changes might be needed in society to ensure that you can have your human rights fulfilled. I've skipped this one, but it is important. As an individual human being, you are a rights holder, but we also talk about this phrase, duty bearers, because the state owes a duty to each one of us, but of course, we owe duties to each other. So I'm sorry that is a bit of a fast work through it. Let's try and make this a bit more concrete by looking at some examples. So the right to life and personal security, the right to free speech, which you probably heard quite a lot about in the news recently. It seems to be a hot topic of debate. Particularly important for you as girls and young women, the right to education and the right to health. And then something that is dear to my heart is the right to a fair trial. Now, there are many more, as we're going to talk about shortly, but this is just to give you a flavour, and I tried to pick some that might be of immediate interest to you. But where do human rights come from in terms of having any legal basis? We talked about the moral idea that we're all born equal in rights, that we're all entitled to respect for our inherent dignity as human beings. But we need to look at where's the legal basis for that? Because if we're going to be able to argue for human rights, whether that is as a lawyer or as an advocate and activist, we need to know what the legal basis for it is. Now, the history has been very checkered, and we could spend an entire presentation on this, but let's just quickly look at some of them. Some thinkers would argue that we can find human rights in religious codes, that we can find human rights in the Code of Hammurabi, to go back to ancient Babylon, and in the Cylinder of Cyrus the Great. So, for example, he practiced that when he'd conquered a land, he didn't enslave the people that were conquered, but gave them their freedom. Then, of course, if we come further towards the Enlightenment or the Age of Reason and the Renaissance, we've got philosophers and thinkers. So people like Hobbes and Locke, they start to talk about human rights. Then we see them appearing in writing from the states. So the earliest one that you might claim to have some human rights element is Magna Carta. There are three main versions of Magna Carta, but I'm going to stick to the 1215 because that's the one that probably you're all most aware of. The right to be tried by your peers appears in Magna Carta, as does the right that we lawyers call habeas corpus, which means in law, you cannot be detained. The actual translation of it is surrender the body. So in other words, if somebody has been detained, you need to follow a legal process. There needs to be a legal rationale for that detention, or else you need to set somebody free. Then again, sticking in England, not because I'm English, but because these are important documents, is the Petition of Rights in 1628. And those of you who know your history will start to think when we see 1628 and 1698 for the Bill of Rights. This, of course, 1628 is around the time of the Civil War. We're coming up to the Civil War at that stage, and the Bill of Rights 1689 is the end of the reign of Charles II and the Glorious Revolution. In the United States, of course, we have the Bill of Rights of 1791, and in France, following the Revolution, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. But the human rights that we really use day in, day out occur at the end of World War II, or rather as a response, if you like, to the absolute horror of World War II. And we'll come on to that in a moment. So at the end of World War II, the United Nations was formed with its charter in 1945. Articles 55 and 56, as you can see there, set out a specific commitment of all those member states for universal respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms. As I said, this was in response to the Holocaust and the slaughter of another 5 million people by the Nazis, people who were Roma, Sinti, trade unionists, communists, and so on. And of course, all the blood that was shed in a war that, on some estimates, I think it's the accepted estimate, took altogether 90 million lives. So obviously a response to that was needed. So let's look at what are the key features of human rights as they appear then in those documents that were created after 1945. Well, first of all, the thinkers that got together to do this said, well, human rights are universal, right? As I said a few moments ago, they belong to each one of us simply because we are human beings. They're inherent because they belong to each one of us because we're human beings. So from the moment that we are born, our human rights are already there for us, or at least they should be. Inalienable, you can't give them away. They can't be sold or taken away. That's the theory. Of course, there are many circumstances in this world today in which people's human rights are being violated, are being trodden over. But we'll talk about that later. At least this is the legal principles of those thinkers that got together to start drafting human rights documents said. This is what shouldn't happen. They shouldn't be taken away. They shouldn't be sold. And they're indivisible, which means they are a package. So we can talk about the right to education, for example, but that comes as part of a package of rights. And so they all link to each other. The right to life, the right to health, the right to education, the right to work, they all go one after another, and then they all come together and mesh together. So those were the key features behind it all. Now, where are we in this picture? The answer is we are in the General Assembly Hall of the United Nations in New York City. And we are here because it is in this room on the 10th of December in 1948 that the first document that we rely upon was agreed and adopted by the representatives of the member states. And that is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or as we lawyers, because we like an acronym, call it UDHR. Now, I'm just going to go back to the date, the 10th of December. That is now recognised as International Human Rights Day. So maybe that's a day, if you don't already know about it, to put that in your diary and think, okay, I'm all about human rights. I'm all about rights for girls. I need to be aware of this day. Now, a declaration technically doesn't have full force of law. It's what we call soft law. But nonetheless, this is where it all starts. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights sets out 30 separate rights. I'm not going to go through them all because, as I say, we simply don't have the time for that, but this is where you need to look. So if you want to go right back to the beginning of our modern international human rights framework, this is where we start. Now, these other two here, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, or ICESCA, from 1966, and its twin, as we refer to them, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, also 1966, are now seen very much as going together with the Declaration. And international human rights lawyers refer to these three as the International Bill of Rights. And the reason for that is that each one of those covenants builds on the main rights set out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and expand them. Now, an interesting piece of history and something perhaps to think about as you're going along on your human rights journey is that there was a lot of division about these two covenants, and bizarrely, the communist states, so the likes of China and what was then the Soviet Union, was much more concerned about economic, social and cultural rights rather than civil and political. Now, that might ring true if you think about it for a minute, because certainly throughout the Cold War period, and to some extent now, democracy has not been a key feature of those kinds of states. So they focused over here on these, and then what we might call the Western states, so the United States, Canada, Australia, Europe, and the UK, were much more interested in things like, well, the right to vote. That's a civil and political right. But the important thing to take away from this slide is the three go together and support one another. So let's quickly then have a look at what some of those rights might be. So under ICESCA, that Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, we find things like the right to food, to shelter, education, work, social security, culture, form of family, and so on. And there are many more than that. This is just a snapshot to give you an idea of some of the key rights. And of course, they apply to each one of us, whether you are a woman, like me, or a girl, as some of you will be. You have the right to food, you have the right to shelter, to education, and so on. On the other side of it, the civil and political rights, this is where we enshrine the right to life, and then importantly for the lawyers listening, the due process of law. So things like that right to fair trial and to be heard, that's here. This is where we find it in the Civil and Political Rights Covenant. And as you can see, freedom from slavery, right to vote, I've already mentioned, association, and so on. So forgive me for skipping on, but say we are short on time. Now then, we start with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then we get the other two, the two covenants that together then the three make up the Bill of Rights. Then over the years, thinkers and members of the General Assembly of the United Nations and so on have decided, well, look, we're trying to make sure human rights exist for people. They're not violated. They are respected, protected, and fulfilled, to use that important phrase. But it became clear that there were certain issues that upon which people's human rights were being violated on a regular basis. So to start with the first of them over here, we have what we call CERD. So that's the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Now, you might think it interesting that that is 1965 when it was adopted by the General Assembly, and those two covenants that helped to make up that big Bill of Rights were the year later. But again, if you think of what was happening in the world at this time, particularly, this is the civil rights era in the United States. So perhaps that explains some of the push to talk about racial discrimination. The next in time, coming up to modern times, is here, this Convention Against Torture. Now, the 1980s was a real period of flux, civil disorder, perhaps rightly so, that's a matter for you to decide, and of hunters in various countries across South America. And there was much talk, and I'm afraid a lot of evidence, about people being subjected to torture. So that perhaps is some of the historical background to 1984 when we have this Convention Against Torture. Now, more recently, one of the issues, but it could easily, I suppose, have come in the 1980s, because you may be aware that people were disappeared in Argentina, for example, in Chile, and so on. But we have here this Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. Now, I'm going to move on quite quickly. As I hope I've made clear now, these rights belong to each and every one of us. So you have the right not to be subjected to torture or inhuman or degrading treatment, just as you have the right not to be subjected to enforced disappearance, and certainly to be discriminated against on the basis of race. I see Ilvana back. Is there a problem? Oh, okay, great. Let's keep going then. As I say, I'm sorry, this is a whistle-stop tour. Now, this is what we are particularly interested in today, because it became clear that certain groups of people were still having their human rights violated because of their membership of a particular group, or because they could be identified in a particular way. So the first of those groups, as it were, to whom attention was given was women. So here we have in 1979, again, we're talking about eliminating discrimination, because it was clear that women were still being discriminated against because they were women. So discriminated in the workplace, discriminated in terms of ability to hold property, financially, to take out loans, have bank accounts in so many parts of the world. So here we go. This is a big one for us, CEDAW, and it's a big one because everybody on this call, even if you're below the age of 18, you will all one day be a woman. And this convention has been used anyway to infer, as it were, rights for girls. Next in time, and again, this is the other one we really need to focus on today, is children, because children have been discriminated against and certainly not given rights on the basis that they were children. For so long throughout history in certain parts of the world, certainly in the West and in the United Kingdom, we had a way of looking at children as property. That was very much prevalent during the Victorian age and into the 20th century. So this is why eventually we get to this convention. Now, perhaps an interesting fact here is this is the most ratified convention. Now, what do I mean by ratified? It means this is the convention that most states in the world have signed up to and said, yeah, we agree with rights for children. In fact, of the 193 member states of the United Nations, only one has failed to agree to be bound by the rights for the child. And that state, I'm sorry to say, is the United States of America. So that is not overly helpful, but again, we could talk for ages about that, and sadly, we don't have time in this presentation. So just moving quickly on, because they do affect us, because certainly if we're a migrant worker or a member of a migrant worker's family, then we want to know about the rights in this convention to protect migrant workers and their families, and that's 1990. And if you are a person with a disability, very importantly, this convention from 2006, the rights of persons with disabilities. And what we're going to talk about at some point today is how your membership of a group, you might be a member of one, or you might be a member of several. So for example, if I am a female child with a disability, then obviously I want to know about my rights that relate to the fact that I have a disability. I want to know about my rights as a child. And I might want to look at CEDAW, because although it refers to women, there are some rights enshrined in there that are important to me because I am a female child. So I hope that sets the background and say, I'm sorry that it is a bit fast, but I'm just going to point out to you, I put here the International Bill of Rights in the centre, because don't forget, everything, every convention or covenant that comes after is building upon these central rights that were agreed by the United Nations back in 1948 for UDHR, and then in 1966 in terms of our civil and political rights and our economic, cultural, and social and cultural rights. Okay, now this is where it's going to get a bit tricky, but hopefully we can do all right. Optional protocols, what on earth does that mean? So it means that a lot of the conventions, yes, the rights were set out, but then lawyers, academics, thinkers, politicians said, well, hang on a minute, we've missed some things, haven't we? So we do have some optional protocols that attempt to deal with things that we might have missed or not sufficiently talked about. So I'm circling here, I don't know if you can see it, may address new substantive issues. So there are protocols about the death penalty, about child soldiers and child sexual exploitation. So if you see an optional protocol, it might be dealing with an issue either that has become a problem since the particular convention was agreed, or that was not sufficiently dealt with in enough detail for what's going on at the time. Importantly, especially from my perspective as a lawyer and yours as activists and lawyers and so on, is to provide an enforcement procedure. So instead of talking about applications or cases, we talk in the International Human Rights Framework about making a communication. So if you want to complain about your state, so your government's treatment of you as a woman or as a girl, you do have the ability in some states to make a communication. Let's just think of that as like a case, to bring a case to committees that were established for ICCPR, don't forget, that is civil and political rights, ICESCA, economic, social and cultural rights, CEDAW, discrimination against women, CRPD, that's the rights of persons with disability, and then CRC, the rights as a child. So if you fall under any of these groups, CEDAW, CRPD, and CRC, there is a body out there that you can bring a case or a communication to. And if you want to complain about how your civil and political rights might be being violated or deprived or denied you, or your economic, social, and cultural rights, there is equally a mechanism in international law for you to go to bring a case. Or as I said, don't forget, they talk about communication. So how do they come about? Well, pretty much conventions and optional protocols come into being in the same way. It's really after a body of activism by people at grassroots level, then sometimes at obviously at national level, then coming together internationally to say, look, there is a problem here. Women are still being discriminated against, despite us having the Universal Declaration and then the two covenants that give us our civil and political, economic, cultural, and social rights. They're still being discriminated against. And what you'll see if you delve into the history of the documents is very often it starts with the declaration. So we get to the point where everybody says, yeah, you're right, this is an issue. So let's have a declaration then about the rights of women or the rights of children. Then people start drafting a treaty. So as you can imagine, this takes an awful lot of work because we have to try and get the 193 member states to agree to its terms. So it's negotiated, and then this formal phrase of being adopted, this is where the member states of the United Nations come and sit in that hall we saw a few slides ago, and then they vote whether or not to adopt that particular convention or that particular protocol. Now, once that happens, the state has to become a member, so it has to say yes. All right, we agreed to that in principle because we let the convention be adopted, but we are going to be bound by it. And they don't have to be. So each convention only binds those countries, those states that have actually committed to it or ratified it, which we'll come to in a moment. And you do that either by what we call ratification or accession. Finally, important to know is that each particular convention or optional protocol says within it what the magic number of countries have to be, have to agree to it before it actually comes into legal force. So just be mindful of that. Just because a convention exists doesn't necessarily mean, number one, that it's enforced generally across the world because we need a sufficient number of countries to adopt it. But secondly, it might not apply to your country because your state government may not have ratified or acceded to it. So what do we mean by that? Ratification is a two-step process. So what happens first of all is the representatives of a country's government will sign it. Now that's a bit like getting engaged, right? The state, think of it like this, that the state is actually getting engaged. So when it comes to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, when states signed it, they were saying, yeah, okay, we are really interested in promoting, in that magic phrase of respecting, protecting, and fulfilling the rights of states. So we've signed it. But that, of course, doesn't mean that the marriage actually happens. It's possible to be engaged and then not engaged. So the next step, that is the marriage, is when it is ratified. Now, some states adopt this two-step process for good reasons. I'll just give you a quick example from my experience. When I worked in the Pacific region, I was part of a team that went to the island state of Tonga, because Tonga had decided that it wanted to sign the Convention on the Rights of Persons with a Disability. But it knew that before it, formally said yes or I do, we're in, we're married, that there were certain things it had to do to comply with the rights that were set out in that treaty. So they had us go along to do a gap analysis to take a look at, okay, if you really do want to ratify and be a member state of this convention, you've got gaps here, here, and here. So that's why some states say, well, we're going to sign it, then we're going to take a look at how much work we need to do, and then we will ratify it when we've got that all in order. So that's, as I've said, a two-step process, and there can be quite a gap of time between the engagement and the marriage. Now, accession means it's all done at once. That's a bit like eloping to get married, I suppose. You don't tell people you're engaged. You go off and you get married. But it can be done. So a state can say, we don't need any time to work out whether or not we're compliant. So we're going to accede to it straight away. So be mindful, though, as I've said to you, you need to make sure that whichever country you live in, when you're looking at a particular convention, that they have actually ratified it or acceded to it. If you see, and when you go onto the internet, the UN is very good at doing tables for each particular convention and setting out country by country where they're up to. So you'll see whether it's signed or not at all. You'll see whether it's been ratified, or you'll see whether it's been acceded to. And that's the magic test. Okay, so we have our conventions and we have our protocols. What now? What does that mean? Well, those international documents, those conventions and those protocols, they're the substance, if you like. They're the laws that set out the human rights that we have and the standards that states are expected to achieve. So in other words, it's what should be done. So CEDAW, of course, is one of them, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And then to be very UK-based about it, so to come down to the domestic level, not up there at the global international level, the Human Rights Act of 1998. So this is the substance, the law. What about practice, though? So a lot of activists, practitioners, and so on will talk about adopting a human rights-based approach. Human rights-based approaches are intended to give us guidance on how we might actually put those rights into practice. So PANEL is one model. Very quickly, PANEL stands for participation, accountability, non-discrimination, empowerment, and legality. I'm sorry we don't have time to go through that, but again, if you're interested in a human rights-based approach, just put that into any search engine and it will take you to a range of them. I put PANEL there because it's the one that we used in the Pacific region. Right, I'm going to need to speed up, I'm afraid. So human rights treaty bodies. These are those magic entities, those magic bodies that you can make a complaint, take a case, make a communication to. They are made up of independent experts who are elected. They monitor the implementation of the treaty, but they work on what a right means, and they do that by issuing things called general comments. So they might look at a particular issue, say, how does the criminal justice system treat children? So there is a general comment that addresses children in a criminal justice situation. And if you go onto the website for the Convention on the Rights of the Child and look at the committee, you'll see a whole list of them there. We're up to 27 general comments, or rather the 27th is in draft form, but there are now fully 26 general comments that have been made to try and expand. What does this right for a child really look like in the context of? So what does right to health look like in the context of climate change, or the right to health, and so on? I'm not going to go through everything. You will get the slides, I hope. But the whole idea is that the committee is established to monitor. One thing I should say to you before we move on is one of the things it does in monitoring is it asks states to report to it on a cyclical basis about how well they're doing. So for CRC, for example, I think we're now at every 5 years because they have to go through each country. So what is required at that point is the state government will do a report looking at all the rights that are set out and say, well, we're doing okay on this right because. And then that report is looked at by 3 states who are appointed to look at it, and then they make their findings and say, well, the United Kingdom might say it's doing very well on this, but we don't think so. So our suggestions are it needs to do A, B, C. That'll become clear when we look at the exercises. So let's move on as quickly as we can. We also have the Human Rights Council, and in this picture, we are in the main chamber for the Human Rights Council, which sits in Geneva. That's part of the trick to this international human rights framework, is remembering where everything is. But as you can see there, this really is a 47-member panel, again, with the responsibility for monitoring the implementation of human rights. What it does here in particular is you'll see this UPR. That stands for the Universal Periodic Review. And so this is, if you like, a holistic, so it's looking at all the conventions together, and it looks at how is the UK, France, Iraq, wherever it might be, actually doing overall. It too has a complaint procedure. This one calls it complaints, not communications. And it has the Committee on Rights, and that deals with the economic, social and cultural rights, and the civil and political rights. So I'm going to try and move on. This quickly tells you a bit more about what those special procedures are. We might be interested in what we call thematic mandates. So we have a number of people that have the title Special Rapporteur. And I've put on the slide, in particular from our perspective, the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls and on Education. These people are not paid for what they do, but they are appointed by the UN as special experts to go and look at the issue, for example, of violence against women and girls. I'm going to let you read that at your leisure because I'm running short of time, as usual. Other, what we can call international human rights bodies, well, some of you are saying, well, I know where they are and what they both are, and some of you may not. So this big brown building with the big spire, that is the International Court of Justice, which sits in The Hague. I'm very happy to say I was able to take that picture last year when I was there. And then next to it, also in The Hague, this is the International Criminal Court. Now, arguably, they are human rights bodies, but what you need to know about the International Court of Justice is this is more a state versus state scenario. So this is not where you as an individual would go. You may have heard in the news, this is where the court, so this is the court rather, that's heard the applications by South Africa and joined by several other countries against the state of Israel alleging genocide. Here in the International Criminal Court, this is where individuals who are accused of committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, this is where they might be brought. And I think perhaps I'll move on with that. Again, look at those at your leisure. If you put them in a search engine, you'll be inundated with references for you to look at. Okay, so at the global level, we've got those treaties that we talked about, what we call the Big Ten, starting with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Underneath that, if you like, and getting closer to us as the individual, we have 3 regional human rights systems in the world. 1, the African, 2, the Inter-American, and 3, the European. So what I've tried to set out for you here is they have their own version, as it were, of UDHR and the two covenants, that main treaty that says these are the rights. So in Africa, as you can see, it's the Charter on Human and People's Rights. And that use of the word peoples has a specific resonance in the context of African history. Again, if you're interested, please go and look that up. The Inter-American, it should be, sorry, American Convention on Human Rights. And then, of course, in Europe, where it all gets really rather complicated, we have the ECHR, or to give it its full title, the Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms from 1950. But that's really about civil and political rights, not entirely, but mostly. So we then have the European Social Charter from 1961, and which was updated in 1996. So you've got to be thinking about those two documents, but the convention, the European Convention on Human Rights, is your first port of call. So do they each have a document about children's rights? Yes, they do. Do they have one about women's rights? Well, Africa does, so big tick there, but no, the Inter-American system does not, nor does the European system. What we do have, and I see put here, Sibalem Parat and Istanbul, these down here are the conventions that we have, the legal documents that we have attempting to address violence against women and girls. Do we have a court? Yes, we have a court for human rights in Africa, in the Americas and in Europe. These figures here are trying to show you the number of states, but I'm going to move on because we've not yet got onto girls' rights, and that's the important thing. But none of them have a specific treaty, convention, whatever you want to call it, on girls' rights. Before we jump to girls, what about at the domestic level, so in your country level? Well, as I've said, be very mindful to look. Has your country signed, ratified, or acceded to a particular convention? And that is also the same at the regional level, so they've got to do the same thing. Be warned, because in some legal jurisdictions in some countries, just because they've acceded to or ratified doesn't mean it's directly applicable in law. This is what we call a dualist system, and I'm not going to go into this in great depth. But for those of you who are British on this call, be very mindful, because the UK is a dualist system. So in other words, our government might agree, it might get married to a convention, but for that to be directly applicable in law, we have to translate that into a piece of legislation that goes through the Parliament in Westminster. Now, it doesn't mean we don't have those rights. Of course we do. And we can still be activists for them. We can still even use them in law. I've done it hundreds of times. But once we got the Human Rights Act, that meant they were directly applicable. We weren't having to persuade judges, which is a bit of a convoluted explanation. Just finally, NHRI, that stands for National Human Rights Institute. So each country is supposed to have one of those, a body nationally that looks at human rights. Right, so let's at long last get on to the girls, because that's what we're interested in. Well, I've put here, listen to women, because as I said to you, there isn't a convention anywhere that looks specifically at girls' rights. So they come, first of all, as female human beings. We need to look at all the women who fought for rights. Now, this slide is not all the women who fought for rights, but I've just put a few of them there. And I'm going to concentrate, if I may, more historically, because Theodora, Empress of Byzantium, she was very much for the rights of women and ensured that that had some role to play when she was empress back in the 6th century. Then we have Christine de Pizan underneath her. She wrote a seminal book called City of Ladies. It was very rare for her time in the 15th century for a woman to be a writer at all. And the only other ones I'm going to quickly look at is next to her with the grey hair, it says Declaration. This lady is Olympe de Gouges. She's French, and she was part of the revolution. But then she was very disillusioned with her compatriots, her male compatriots, because, as you saw in an earlier slide, they have the declaration on the rights of man and the citizen. So she said, excuse me, what about the women? Did we not start the revolution because we marched on Versailles? Yes, they did. Have I not been an instrumental part in this, and other women too? Yes, she and they were, but they were cut out of that document. So she wrote the Declaration on the Rights of Woman and the Citizen, and for her pains, her fellow revolutionaries sent her to Madame la Guillotine. So she was executed by them because she insisted on women's rights being included. And then just to bring it back to Britain very quickly, at the top under women, this is Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote a document entitled Vindication of the Rights of Woman. To say very quickly, these bronze ladies here, and not to be forgotten, his name's just gone out of my head now. Oh, goodness me. These were the people that were at the Seneca Falls Convention back in 1848. So these are a lot of the women in the United States who started that. I want to jump to, in the bottom right, as you look at the screen, are 5 lovely looking ladies. These ladies were all part of that team that got together to discuss, argue about, and then draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So women were in there at the beginning. And in fact, this lady here in the sari, Ms. Mehta, she is the one that had it changed from man's rights to human rights. And then the bronze lady in the middle here, that is Eleanor Roosevelt, who was First Lady of the United States for most of the Second World War. And she led that delegation that created the Universal Declaration. So these ladies, we certainly have a great deal to be thankful for. Maybe I'll write some notes so that you know who everybody else is and why they're important. All right, quickly. So what about listening to the girls, though? That's the women saying, what about women's rights? But what about the girls? Now, I suspect you've all heard of Malala Yousafzai, no longer a girl. I think she's in her early 30s now. And Greta Thunberg, also no longer a girl. She in late 20s. Where have girls been included in this? Well, the answer is really, they haven't. Girls are included, as I think I've already suggested. Girls get lumped under children. Well, we have we have a treaty about children's rights. So there you go, girls, you're covered. And then if you're not, we have a treaty about women. So you're covered under that, aren't you? Well, yes, but what is there specifically about being a girl, not just being female and not just being a child, that means your rights are at greater risk of being violated or being denied? And have girls been heard? Can women speak for girls? I don't think I can, because I have to go back a long way to remember what it was like being a girl. So personally, I don't believe I have the right to speak for all of you. So we need to think about, how can we get girls' voices heard? Then I've already touched on this. It's important to think about this, what we call intersectionality. So for those of you who are a bit older, I want to go and look it up. An American lady, academic called Kimberly Crenshaw, she is really the person who came up with this idea of the intersectionality of discrimination. And she was thinking particularly about being an African-American woman, so being a Black woman and a woman in the United States. But it counts across the board. So as I was saying earlier, you can be discriminated against because you've got a disability. You might also be discriminated against because you're female and because you're a girl. And what the theory of intersectionality suggests is, it's not simply like we say, well, I've got 1 disability, 2 female, 3 a child, and that amounts to 3. What she's actually saying is that when you put those characteristics together, it creates something entirely new, some different form of discrimination, and that we really need to be careful about its impact. So just a thought from me, because women were discriminated against and denied rights, of course, we get feminism. And there have been several waves of feminism. I think we've had the 4th wave of feminism, but that has been an attempt by women to demand equality with men. More recently, and this is still an evolving area of a legal academic thought, is this concept of childism. So again, that's recognizing, well, yeah, we might have treaties and all the rest of it, but children are still discriminated against and not treated as a separate kind of entity deserving of not just the rights, but maybe a different way of looking at rights. And we need to be careful again about how they get their voice. So do we need girlism that says, look, feminism doesn't completely cover us, childism doesn't completely cover us either. What we need is girlism. But that's just my idea. So I think you already know the answer to this one, what I've said. Where do we find girls' human rights? And I'm sorry to say the answer to that is we have to put together CEDAW, that convention about not discriminating against women, and CRC, that convention about the rights of the child. We have to put those two documents together and see, okay, where do these particular rights apply to girls? Or perhaps more importantly, where does the denial or the violation of this right have a particular impact on a girl because she's a girl? So because we're looking at the treaties, we put them together. We also can look at the general comments that the Committee on the Rights of Women, CEDAW Committee, give it a proper title, and the Committee on the Rights of the Child, we can look at the general comments that they've each made and put those together when we're making our arguments. So if we put them together, how does what's being said on behalf of women and what's being said on behalf of girls, how can we put that together to make an argument, for children, to make an argument specifically for girls? So we're talking about interpreting the texts, that legal foundation. We're talking about looking at the cases, all those communications that have been decided, and we're talking about how can we then be creative and put those together. So very quickly then, we need to know something about CEDAW, that Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination. What's really central to that idea? Well, obviously, non-discrimination, which you'll find in Article 1. The purpose of CEDAW was to talk about no discrimination against women and to create what we call substantive equality. So instead of simply saying, well, of course, we're all equal, right? So if you are female or identify as female, you're equal to someone who is male or identifies as male. Well, but as we know in life, saying something doesn't make it real. So the whole idea in this treaty was to say, what do we really need to do, though, to make that real, to make that someone's lived reality? So it addressed legal status because, for example, for a very long time in many cultures around the world, including in the UK, I'm sorry to say, a woman was not regarded as a separate legal entity once she was married. And also the concept of a wife being raped by a husband, you'll be shocked to know that that wasn't accepted in English law until as recently as 1991. So that idea that a woman is the property of a man, that was the idea that underscored, of course they can't be raped in marriage. That's something that needs to be looked at. And there's a lot of focus, thankfully, on the reproductive role of women. And importantly here, this recognition that cultural norms and traditions and the gender stereotypes that we've created in various societies around the world, they can really have an impact on whether women are able to enjoy their rights. So as you can see, this was all about, the treaty was all about trying to say, look, as governments, as states, we need to work on this, right? You need to look at changing society, not just making sure those rights were realised, but a recognition that to give women those rights, we have to change society. We have to change how we think about the roles of men and women. But there is no mention at all of violence in this convention. And it doesn't define woman, which for so long might have seemed, well, is that necessary? But maybe these days we want to think about that because could a trans woman rely upon the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women? I would say yes. Some decisions have said yes, but also equally there are some legal decisions, and you've heard from the Supreme Court recently on its definition of a woman. So watch this space on that one. So let's move to children. It does define a child, and that is any human being below the age of 18. So I'm afraid it's this idea that on your 18th birthday, ding, you're an adult, you're no longer a child. But I suppose there has to be some defining line when we're talking about rights and responsibilities. So there you go. It's set internationally at 18, but that is not the case domestically in every country. But it's based on 4 key principles, Again, non-discrimination. This next one is very important, the best interests of the child, because we have adopted that in many societies and we now apply it in law when we're making decisions about children. Certainly in the family law context, we are always talking about what is in the best interests of the child. And you'll see there, number 4, participation, but that's also what we call one of the 3 Ps. So if you like, the thing to remember about CRC, it's got 4 guiding principles, but it's also got 3 pillars, which helps to remember that it's 3. The promotion of the survival and development of a child's protection from various forms of abuse, and also participation. So this is the idea about how children are allowed to say what their rights should be and to argue how they should be heard in decision making. I'm going to say that certainly in the family law context, we have got a long way to go on this still, on how we give participation to children. I'm going to move on quickly because time is running out. So I'm going to skip over these 2 slides and let you have a look. This goes back to what I was saying. You do potentially have the capacity to bring a case to the Committee on the Rights of Women, or the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and it sets out there. And you do also, under CRC, if your state government has accepted it under the protocol, have the ability. But it doesn't matter, even if your state has accepted it, you cannot bring a claim, a case, or a communication to either of those committees unless you have what lawyers call exhausted all domestic remedies. So obviously that means if we are in England and Wales, for example, our jurisdiction, then you've got to have gone from whatever was your first court to the Court of Appeal, to the Supreme Court, if that's appropriate, but be able to say, I've tried everything at my country level and I'm not getting anywhere. And another important thing to say is, at that point, of course, depending on where you live, you could bring your case to the African Court of Human Rights or the European Court of Human Rights, or go to a treaty body. And we don't have time, I'm afraid, to talk about that. But let's get into the nitty-gritty. What are the challenges then? Well, first of all, it might be that we don't have a document that sets out specifically what girls' rights are, or how we should interpret the rights that everybody has in a way that ensures that girls get to have those rights. Also, over recent years, there is a backlash against human rights generally. So we need to counter that. Now, this is me being a feminist, but I would say that this is true. We need to think about the structures of society, the patriarchal structures of society. Sorry. I was getting too excited and I bashed the keyboard. I'm sorry about that. And the gender stereotyping that goes with it. Because whether we like it or not, when we talk about patriarchal societal structures, law, certainly for England and Wales, has largely been made by men. In 1989, when that Convention on the Rights of the Child was adopted by the UN General Assembly, there were only 30 women MPs. And perhaps equally as important, because this is about then racial discrimination just as much, there were only 4 MPs who would describe themselves as people of colour. So you might think, well, if that's the lawmaking body in our country, it was not very representative. We've touched on culture and all the rest of it. So this is this idea that, you know, if you're a girl, you get dollies to play with. If you're a boy, you might get toy guns. This idea that if we said to a room full of people, what sex or gender is a doctor? And most of them will say, a man. What sex is a nurse? A woman. And so on. So these ideas that there are certain roles that men and women have and that they can't cross that divide between the roles. Girls knowing their rights, which is why you are all here and why the Girls' Human Rights Hub exists, to help you to understand those and to give you your voice. These are some of the challenges. So I'm asking you, this is not for today really, but to think more generally, what is missing from the treaties, or is it a treaty that's missing, or what needs to be improved for girls? So these are just some of my ideas, as well as ideas of others that work in this field. I think we really do need to understand this issue of intersectionality and how being discriminated against on various grounds can really have a massive impact that is way beyond the effect of being discriminated against on just one of those. Should girls' rights, as we're saying, be differentiated from women and children? Do we need a definition of a girl? Because if we're talking about do we need to define a woman, and I'm being agnostic on that, then do we need to define who a girl is? So if a young person is transitioning, at what point, if they become a trans girl, can they take these rights or not, as the case may be? That's a discussion that we need to have as a society. Sexual and reproductive rights. So there's a lot of talk about abortion, especially because of what's been happening in the United States. And if you think that a girl, certainly in England and Wales now, cannot consent to sex below the age of 16, then should there be a right to abortion up to 16? I don't know. These are just ideas for you to think about. And then going back to those special mechanisms that we have at the international level, those special rapporteurs. Yes, we have a special rapporteur on violence against women and girls, but should we have one that specifically looks at girls' rights? I don't know. That's to think about. So what can you do? Well, obviously, you can learn about your rights and the arguments that support them. And hopefully this presentation and the rest of what we're going to do in this session is going to set you on the way for that. You can spread the word. We have so many wonderful girls and young women who work with the Girls' Human Rights Hub, in school hubs, in university hubs, who make presentations, hold events and so on, to spread the word, and do so in a creative way. So one particular group, they had an open mic evening, and I'm bringing that up because I want to use that as an example to say, expressing yourself, and that doesn't have to be standing somewhere with a placard saying we want girls' rights. You can do that in a piece of writing, in song form or in dance, but whatever it might be, however you best or most enjoy expressing yourself. That's what we need to do. You can get involved. One thing I haven't mentioned is all these human rights bodies at the international level, when they're going to make a general comment, for example, or thinking about it, they ask for calls for input. And you can do that. Individuals, either as a single person or as a group or as a more formal organization, can contribute, can say, this is what we think about this issue. So look out for those, and if you want, get involved. Obviously, claim your rights. Don't be afraid to do that, because you're not on your own. We are all not behind you, but standing next to you and prepared to stand in front of you if needs be to protect you in you claiming your rights. And if I can just say this, and this is just me, just be kind to each other, because there are many circumstances in which the female kind is pitted against itself. I really do think that that is to the detriment of all of us. So let's be kind, let's look after each other, let's support each other, because we're all in this together. So thankfully, not too much over time, only 5 minutes. Thank you for listening. I don't know, Ilvana, whether questions are best now or whether we should move to the suggested exercise. I see you nodding. Questions?
Yes, however you see fit, Celeste, but I do think since we don't have any questions already from the participants, maybe we go into the exercise, and in the meantime, please, everyone, if you have any question about any particular mechanism, anything that you maybe didn't understood very well, or if you want more explanation from our very own expert, this is the time. Like if you had any questions that you maybe have heard before, about a tribunal or about an international institution that you want to hear more about, this is the time. But I know it's a very broad topic, and it's a lot of this new information, and of course, maybe it would be better to go into the exercise, and in the meantime, whatever comes up, just type it in there, and we'll also help you during the 30-minute exercise.
I'm a bit worried, Ilvana. Lack of questions might mean that was completely overwhelming, and I am.
It's the topic. It's the topic, Celeste. It's completely understandable. Like I'm working on this in this field for a while now, and it's still oof, there's so much, but there should be more about raising capacities and information. So every young girl should know if she has something, a problem with any of her rights, and it shouldn't be a major violation. So you shouldn't go for something that really, really affects you to the core, but it can be also something that does affect you. And even just the exercise of getting to know this institution, I think it should be core learning in every education system. Yeah.
I
We
completely
have a
agree.
note from our founder, from executive director, and she said, "How can young girl get involved in international human rights work? What kind of work do you do as a barrister in this area?
What kind of work do we do at the what? Sorry.
What kind of work do you do as a barrister in this area?" So maybe like to share something about your day-to-day, so the others can.
Okay. So I think I touched a little bit on how you can get involved at whatever stage of life you are, and whatever job or profession you have, and that's things like calls for inputs. They actually want to have people getting involved. Maybe what we need to do is publicize those more broadly. So, what have I done? As a barrister, I spent the first 10 years doing a mixture of criminal cases and family cases. And I tried throughout, I'm say I'm not the one to judge how well I did, but I tried throughout to bring that human rights-based approach to it. And to remember the dignity of the person that I was representing, or all the people that were involved in the case, no matter how heinous, how awful, they may have allegedly acted. We are all human beings, and that dignity is important. I have had the really great privilege, though, to work overseas. So the first place I went was Tajikistan in Central Asia, and there I worked for an organization called the Girl Support Service. So we were specifically attempting to look after girls, advancing their rights, trying to protect them from harm. I mean, there are a multitude of ways that you can get involved. So for those on the line, perhaps who are thinking about, well, O levels, A levels, what should I do at university? What do I want to be? This sounds trite, it's always trotted out, but I do believe it. Follow your passion. And as I said, there's many ways to be an advocate and an activist. You don't just have to be a lawyer. You can do it in so many ways. You can do it as an artist, or you can have a full-time job and then get involved with local groups or national groups on the side. There are so many ways to be involved. It just requires that, I suppose, courage or bravery to stand up and start talking about it. And then you'll find who around you is interested in joining, or there may already be groups. So, for example, if the Girls' Human Rights Hub has a specific hub at your school, get involved. If it doesn't, start one. If it has one at your university, get involved. If not, how's about starting one? We'll support you to do that. So there are many ways. And of course, one campaign that the Girls' Human Rights Hub is running is the campaign to make February classified as Girls' Human Rights Month. And this is an attempt to say some of what I've put in the presentation, which is we do need to have a special focus on girls, because there is that added dimension to how our rights are denied or violated as girls. That's different to being a woman, and that's different to being a child. So join that. So join our campaign to do that at school. Perhaps see if you can make a presentation, or just talk to a group of friends and start it from there. Again, at university, see if you can make a presentation of some kind, or start up a society or an organization. You name it. There's plenty of ways to get involved. So if we're going to look at, and I don't think I've engaged brain sufficiently, hang on, maybe we can do this. I'm not sure if you're all going to be able to read it. Oh, move the slide, Celestine. So time to take a closer look. So as we said, we're going to give you about half an hour, but that's going to cut down on our discussion time, I'm afraid.
Yes, I think 20 minutes.
Okay. Well, that's all right, because I wanted something that was going to be quick for you to read. So the first is only 2 pages long. The second is 4 pages long, but it talks about a range of countries. So you needn't read all of them, obviously. So the first is a summary of a case that was before the Committee on the Rights of the Child quite recently in 2023. This case is Cass Miller against Peru. And this is about, I think she was a 13-year-old girl at the time that the violations started, or certainly were applicable for the purposes of the case. The second document is a press release. So again, if you just Google the Committee on the Rights of the Child, it will immediately come up, and there are so many resources. And they do what they call a child-friendly version. So if you're at the lower end of the age group that's with us today, and you find that easier to read than some of the very convoluted language, because that is a problem, I think, at this international level, the language is very highbrow. There are child-friendly versions. So this is a press release, because if you can remember, I said that one of the roles of the committees is to review how well individual countries are doing on looking after the rights of children. So this one is a very recent, and they looked at Brazil, Indonesia, Iraq, Norway, Qatar, and Romania. So you'll see, although it's 4 pages, there's like a paragraph that's, say, a third of a page on each one of those. Now, I have them both open, so I could screen share those, but I realised that not all 4 pages are going to fit on. So I'm not sure what's the best way to do this, Ilvana. I think, I did send them to you, but the email didn't come through, did it? So can we...
So just send the email again if you can just forward it to me. And we have this space on Mighty Network for everyone who has had the chance to join. I'm going to share the screen again, and I'm going to share both the presentation and the resources there. Let me see. I'm going to let you know.
It's back on. I'm in Nigeria, and we sometimes lose power completely or internet. So my technical advisor, my husband, said, switch everything else off.
Okay.
So just let me do that. And
Perfect. So,
Barbara, forgive me, for once I'm not sending a message, just to make it faster.
no problem.
Everybody waiting. I'm sorry about that. There we go.
Oh,
Come on, that's one. Oops, amazing.
I wonder if can
There you go.
I wonder if can you see my screen now, Celeste?
No. I need to stop sharing, don't I?
Yeah, maybe can you please stop sharing? Just
There we go.
perfect. So to everyone, this is our community-based platform that we use, Mighty Network. And for everyone, I did try to add you here. I will also put it on the chat box, but I will post here both of the links. And for convenience, I might also share them with you on email. If you can again maybe share that slide of the presentation so they can have it on the exercise slide, please, Celeste.
Sure. That might be easier said than done, as we encountered earlier. For everybody that's participating, don't get stressed about this. This is just trying to give life to the things that we've been trying to talk about, so that you can see, well, yeah, there are cases, and this is the kind of thing that they deal with. And yeah, countries are held to account, and this is what it looks like. But nobody's going to be tested on it. It's more for you to think about. And then, we're interested in hearing your views. Nobody's bothered about mine. We want to hear what you've got to say. Right, so I'm now attempting to send you a slideshow. It doesn't like it because I tried to use lots of pretty pictures and it doesn't like it at all. Let me see. Right. This is where I think I said to you, my chambers system kicks in and says, "Whoa, you sure you
Yeah.
can see that?"
No problem at all. If you could just share your screen, that would be fine as well. So I will give you until 11:40, please, to finalize this exercise because we have another session going on. And what we're doing as well, Celeste, is we're giving the time. So we would appreciate a couple of you do finalize the exercise so we can discuss it. I will share now both of the it is coming to your emails as well. But what would be good is so a couple of you to do it so we can discuss it. And then for everyone else, you can send your reply or your thoughts on email. And we are planning to do another session for all of the exercise that we couldn't discuss before. But it should come to you now.
Ivana, can you see? I think I'm screen sharing. I think it's the right one, but can you see it?
Oh yeah, perfect.
Okay. So everybody
I'm gonna.
start to read.
Okay, perfect. I sent to them on email as well, Celeste.
I just apologise to you all. I'm sorry. I had thought I'd sent these through last night, but the issue has been at my end, so I'm very sorry about this delay and inconvenience.
No problem at all, Celeste. I'm also sending to them on the Mighty Network. Hi everyone.
Well, I think we have 14 things in the question and answer, do we?
Yeah. Chicka, 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 chicka.
So Madeline has asked, what's the difference between ratification and accession? Madeline, in case you're able to hear and read at the same time, in effect, there's no difference because they're the two mechanisms that a country can use to say, okay, now we want to get married to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. The difference is a ratification takes two steps. First of all, you get engaged to it, which means you sign it, and then you formally ratify. Accession means you just do it all in one go. You take out that first step. You just say, okay, we're in, we're completely in. That's the difference. But in terms of the effect, they mean the same thing. It means that that particular country is saying, okay, we are agreeing to be bound by the terms of this treaty and to give the rights set out in that treaty to the children or to the women or whoever it might be that we're talking about. Maybe I'll come back to them, let people read first. I'm just having a look at what they are.
Maybe we can text a couple of more to some of the questions, reply in text, and we're gonna leave them to finalize everything in please by 11:40 everyone comes back in because we need to finish everything as soon as possible because we then have another session for the scholars program. And to maybe apologize for the issue with the connection, we're gonna provide you the chance to maybe attend the following session we are having with a Harvard professor at the scholars program, and it's about gender-based violence, and she's gonna touch a bit on the legislation part. So Celeste, I do think it can be like a follow-up to this session. So for whoever wants to join, I'm gonna type in the link.
Great, that sounds really exciting.
Okay.
I'm getting a message saying my internet is unstable.
Yes, you're frozen.
Sorry.
No worries, no worries, no worries. Okay.
Amelia is saying she doesn't have access to the network. It says And that was a few minutes ago. Hopefully, Amelia, you're okay now. Oh,
Yeah.
Christy, name.
Do we send reply answers to the activity of the admin? Yes, Christy, please, everyone send it to the admin or have it on hand to do. But I would appreciate you send to the admin, and maybe I can also share my screen when you're giving the time. And we do have the chance to allow you to talk. So whoever wants to talk and deliver their response to any of the points, then they can raise the hand and we can in the time. Amelia, Chrissy, I gave you access to the Mighty Network.
And if needs be, Ilvana, I can just read certainly the case. It's only 2 pages, and people can be thinking about it as I read, and then the girls and young women can interject as they wish. That's another way around it, I suppose.
Let me see.
I mean, this says it's resolved. That's great. Okay.
Alice. Maybe they have started working on it, Celeste, so maybe we just give them their time. So it's like 15 minutes already. Okay, perfect. Celeste, do you think in the meantime we can start like going through the questions until we have the first hands raised from our participants who wants to maybe explore the exercise?
Sure. There are several. Put my
Yes.
glasses back on. There are
Safi, yes. Safi, can you start maybe reading Neisha's question?
Oh, I was going to put them together, but however you want to do it.
Yes, if Safi can read them and then you give your opinion.
You
Perfect.
should start from the top.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is from Nisha. Hi, thank you so much for explaining these concepts to us. How would you suggest we can explore these topics more and stay up to date on human rights news?
Thank you, Nisha. Look at the sources that are at the end of this presentation. There's 3 pages of them. As I said, I could have gone on and on, but I put them there to attempt to give you a start. So certainly start with that. On the Girls Human Rights Hub website, we do have spaces where we talk about the rights and the substance of them. So that's a great place to start as well. Look for websites for organisations. Plan International, for example, they did what you might describe as an audit of girls' rights back in 2018. So if you type in Plan International Girls' Human Rights, that will bring it up. In terms of staying up to date, most organisations, so like Plan, for example, or indeed at the international level, will have a link where you can subscribe to news. So obviously definitely click on those. What I was going to do, because there are some similar questions, is perhaps if I do a list of other resources and organisations, and then we can, if it's possible to email that out to everybody who joined, I'm very happy to do that, but it's going to take me a couple of days, I'm afraid. I hope that helps anyway.
I
That
mean,
would
also,
help.
you could join Girls Human Rights Hub, so just saying. Anyway.
That would help a lot, Celeste. And we have the Mighty Network space, and I can also join you there, add you there, and we can continue this round of questions. I mean, your session is definitely the foundation of the course. So it is very good for every participant to have their core notions understood, and then followed with the others.
Okay.
Okay, should we move on to the next question? Okay, this is from Saskia. In your opinion, how would the best way to learn about our rights as girls be?
Saskia, I think it's, as I've tried to explain, hopefully starting with today, we do have to, I'm afraid, difficult though it may be, we do have to go to the actual documents themselves. So having a read of CEDAW and of CRC so that you've got a wider understanding, because I've only referred to some of the rights. You know, for example, in CEDAW, I think it's Article 16 off the top of my head, that talks in particular about the position of rural women. So there's no shortcut to actually looking at the law. But again, go to our website, have a look there, and then start looking for other organisations that might be talking about girls' rights. Stay involved in the Girls' Human Rights Hub. If you can, come to the festival in February, and certainly keep an eye out for news that we're sending out about the campaign and so on. But again, I'll send some resources. Finding specifically, other than the Girls' Human Rights Hub, somewhere where there is a collection of materials for girls is a little bit difficult. So I'm not just saying it because it's the Girls' Human Rights Hub, I'm saying it because it is the best single concentrated site for finding that information.
Okay. This is from Aya. What impact can barristers have in shaping education policies that prioritize the rights of girls?
I'm not. I think there is a level at which being a barrister as well makes something of a difference. But I think we all as individuals can make that difference, right? We can all say these are things that we need to know about. So we can be lobbying our MPs. We can be writing to them and asking them, what do you know about human rights? We could check their record. How many times have they participated in human rights discussions? There is a joint select committee on human rights, which is led by Lord Alton of Liverpool. And Helena Kennedy, King's Counsel, she's been a great voice for human rights for many decades now. You can go on their website. They also have inquiries. They've got one on at the minute, which is looking at the rights of how children's rights are reflected or are realised in court proceedings. So I think we can all individually lobby. We can send in submissions to things like joint select committees. We can ask questions of our MPs. I think the only difference that being a barrister makes, and it's not every barrister, because don't forget, we're very specialised these days, and there are some areas of law, commercial law, for example, human rights should come in there as far as I'm concerned. But I think those of us who are really at the cutting edge of where human rights are really up for grabs every day. So, you know, in the criminal law context, where you're talking about somebody's liberty, in the family law context, the work I do, where we're talking about children allegedly having been abused in some way and whether or not they need to be permanently separated from their family. That's what we call the European Article 8 right to family life. So I suppose for people like Sultana and I who have worked in these fields where it's really up close and personal, we may have a certain something to add. But I would say that, you know, as a barrister, I'm a human being. I'm a woman. I was a girl. And I should talk from that perspective just as much, saying that I have some technical experience as well. But I do agree with you. We need to, everybody needs to be mobilized. This can't just be a sporadic thing.
Okay. A question from Melissa. How do you think we can integrate education surrounding girls' rights into national curriculums for students from a young age? Do you think that it is important that we give equal weight in teaching girls' human rights to both girls and boys?
So first of all, how can we get it in there? If I had my way, it would be taught in school. And I would certainly start with, why is international human rights not a compulsory course on every law degree? It's not. In my view, it should be, but then I would say that, wouldn't I? I think how we can get it in there is parents, again, can be asking, you can be asking as students, you know, is there any point at which we can talk about human rights? If you have specific civics education, you can ask for it to be dealt with there. Equal weight, of course, because you know, although I show her the slide with a lot of women, I remembered his name now. Heaven forgive me. Frederick Douglass is the man in that bronze statue, and Frederick Douglass is more well known for being himself a former slave, and then someone who went on. He was a great orator. And went on to argue for the abolition of slavery. But he also very much supported all those women. That's why he went to Seneca Falls and was there at that convention to show his allyship. Now, he's just one of thousands of men. You probably know that saying, behind every great man, there's a great woman. Right, but behind these women, or helping these women, if not behind them, it is men. So we're kind of in it together. So I think certainly boys do need to be educated about girls' human rights. They also need to be educated about their own. And I was just wondering, talking to my husband the other day, whether we don't need to revisit boys' rights. So, for example, gender stereotypes have the potential to negatively impact them just as much as girls and women. You know, there's this talk about toxic masculinity, and the boys don't cry, for example, because boys and men have to seem to be strong and they don't show their emotions. Maybe we should look at, there's a human right to be allowed to express themselves emotionally, that there isn't this standard that they need to be held to. And I think maybe we as females, or identifying as females, should be just as interested in that too.
Really great answers. So now,
I see that Sultana has her hand raised. Sultana, I'm gonna give you the chance to talk, and can you see if
Hi. Hi, thank you so much, Urbana. So first of all, thank you so much, Celeste, for an amazing webinar. I've just been listening throughout, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's just been super, super informative. And I wish I had you teaching me when I was studying international human rights law. So thank you so much for all the work that you've put into it, and for answering all of the questions, and for preparing what looks like an amazing exercise. And I'll be working on it myself to see what I can also learn from it. So thank you so much. Just to let everybody know, so just in terms of resources, there's a huge amount of resources on our website. So please do have a look there when you have an opportunity. The programs that we're holding over the summer are part of the Girls Human Rights Academy. And so if you go onto our website, you'll see a section on the Academy. Within the Academy, you'll have information about all of these programs that we've been running over the summer. And you'll also see a section called the Knowledge Hub, where there's a huge amount of information about every single one of these girls' human rights that we've been discussing throughout. So there's a vast amount of information on the website. There's going to be more and more going up. We also have lots of blogs, lots of podcasts, lots of toolkits, again, on our website, which you can immediately access. It's readily available. And so please do have a look at those. We also, as Celeste mentioned, we have the Girls' Human Rights Festival that runs every February. And so we have 5 days in London of really incredible sessions. We have over 100 participants attending each day. We have thousands on our reserve list. If you get an opportunity, do attend. We have events from the Supreme Court to law firms to barristers' chambers to the Houses of Parliament. So they are an incredible learning experience, an incredibly enjoyable experience. So do sign up if you are able to attend those events. One of the new things that we've done since last year is we've launched the Girls' Human Rights Month campaign. Now, that's a little bit like International Women's Day or Black History Month. What we're saying is that girls' human rights are so important and also neglected. And again, this is one of the things Celeste has highlighted, that you have women's rights, which are protected by CEDAW, you have children's rights, which are protected by the Convention of the Rights of the Child, but there's nothing specific for girls. And there are so many things that girls have to grapple with in terms of human rights, but there isn't a single document or a comprehensive document or documents that deals with it. And so the idea behind Girls' Human Rights Month is that we ask people to campaign and push for recognition. So a whole month is dedicated just to girls' human rights. And we hope that's a part of a movement that will then get countries to look at and pay more attention to girls' human rights. There's lots of other work that going on in the background in relation to that. But please do go on our website and have a look. One of the ways, in addition to all of the things I mentioned, one of the other ways you can get involved is to host your own event for Girls' Human Rights Month. Now, you can do that yourself. You can do that at school. You can do that at university. If you're working, you can do that in your workplace, and you can encourage others to do it. And we have lots of toolkits on our website which tell you how you can get involved. Another way to get involved is to set up a mini hub, a Girls' Human Rights mini hub at your school, your college, your university, and a little bit like a society, and you can run your own events there. I think one of our most active mini hubs are the university ones are Cambridge University and Aston University, but it's growing, and so it may be that you want to set something up, and that's one way of keeping up to date, being involved in girls' human rights work in terms of, and it's one way of being part of a much broader movement. Finally, one of the things that one of our interns, so one of our interns she's been a young expert. She was part of our several programs. She was a coordinator of the Young Experts program. And this year she came to England, came to the UK from the US for an internship for about 3 months. One of the things she's done is she's developed an amazing research database, which will go live probably around end of September, beginning of October, and we'll have a soft launch. And it's an appraisal of every country and how they score in terms of how girls' human rights friendly they are. And so that should be an amazing database and resource base that you can all tap into to see how countries are progressing, where countries are, and where you can then make a meaningful change in terms of girls' human rights. Beyond that, in the pipelines, we also have a litigation unit that we are, Celeste and I and Ilvana, we're all working on setting up. And so we will also engage in working on actual cases, and there will be opportunities for young people to get involved in that. So please do go onto our website. There's just a vast amount of information, and one of the reasons why we set up, and we're very unique in this, is that we focus on girls' human rights from an international law perspective. And we want girls to be involved in this. The whole idea, the whole point of it is to give you a voice and for you to take ownership and to get involved in it. So please do have a look at everything we have to offer. And as Ilvana said, a fantastic second session actually following on from Celeste's absolutely brilliant session is the Scholars Program. Now you'll have, this is week 5, but the speaker that we have is an amazing speaker, and you may want to find out more about girls' human rights. She's a Harvard professor. She's head of gender studies at Harvard, and it'll be a fantastic continuation of this session if you are able to join. And that's starting, I think, in the next hour at 12 o'clock. Anyway, thank you all so much. And again, thank you so much, Celeste, for all the work, hard work that you've put into this and all the work that you do for Girls' Human Rights Hub. Thank you.
My pleasure. I think do we have about 10 minutes left?
Yes. And Celeste, just before we continue with the questions, and thank you, Sultana, for your information, to share with everyone what I'm doing for all the answers that I'm receiving. So here at the virtual work experience phase that we have on the Mighty Network, I've added 2 other cases. So this is the first case, this Casmilla versus Peru. And then here I have the country review findings for the of the 5th of June, 2025. So I've put here both answers that I've had. One's from Sophia and the other is from Christy. And Celeste, I give you access as well to this space. And then if we don't have any time to continue with the review of the answers, I think we can reply here on any comments that we have of their work. So now we can continue with the questions for the 5 minutes that we have left. How do you think?
Our attention to Una has asked a question specifically about one of the documents. Una is saying, just looking at the CRC country review resource, wondering how something like this as a report comes into action taken.
Yeah.
So the answer to that, Una, is each country. So let's take Brazil, for example. There is a specific report about Brazil. Obviously, this is just a summary. And in that report, there will be conclusions and recommendations. And then Brazil is required to respond to that in terms of how they are going to, first of all, whether they accept that conclusion, and then whether or not they're going to enact the recommendations. The problem with it is, like so much of international law, is there's no actual watchdog to go around and say, okay, well, now we're going to fine Brazil, or now we're going to get the prime minister or the president, Lula, you must come before a court and answer to all of this. It more works on a name and shame situation. And in fact, I think, let me just see, was it Sarah or Sarah? Forgive me if I mispronounced it. Sarah had asked, how can international bodies influence countries like the USA? Well, it's very difficult to influence the USA because it continues to be, arguably, but for how much longer, who knows, the world's only superpower. That power is, some might say, being rather aggressively and certainly unconventionally wielded at the moment. So the ability to influence them is limited. I mean, we've all seen, haven't we, on the news, national leader after national leader going to the White House and using various strategies. But again, it's about naming and shaming. I mean, I tell everybody I can, and I say this as someone who's also a joint US citizen, married to an American diplomat, that the United States is the only country not to have ratified CRC. How can that be? And it seems to me that if it threw its weight behind things like child rights, it would make a difference, because believe it or not, and that might be changing as a result of this administration, but certainly hitherto, the United States had a great deal of power. And when I was in the Pacific, for example, people would say, whichever convention we were talking about, they would ask, has the United States ratified this? So that is the power of that particular country. But how we get them to abide by, I don't know. That it is often said that their objections to The Convention on the Rights of the Child are around education, because homeschooling is a big freedom, as it were, and also around the age at which people can join the military, because just like in the UK, you can join the military younger than 18. My response to that is, well, you can do the same as the UK has done about that and enter what's called a reservation. And that's a way of a country saying, yes, look, we want to be married to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, but this bit is a bit tricky for us. So can we just like opt out of that for the time being? And it chooses not to do that. I think some of that is about American exceptionalism. But back to the report. So yes, Brazil are then invited to respond, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, there is no real teeth. It is diplomatic pressure. It is public pressure. Hopefully, it would be people in Brazil saying, look, we see that these recommendations were made, that these findings about violations were found. What are you going to do about it? And I'm sorry to say that that's all we've got, but that pretty much is the situation for now. I'm sorry, Betsy asked several questions, didn't she, that were all...
Yes, I did say that she can put these questions on the chat box on the Mighty Network, and for everyone else, Celeste, I think that would be the best option. So I think they have a lot of questions for this session, and we can dedicate, and what we're going to do as well with all the other speakers that follow all the sessions here at the virtual work experience program, is we're going to have this chat, but even of the feed. So like I'm going to say, hi everyone, please put below all the questions you have for Celeste.
Okay, and I will try and answer them all. All I will say then, because we need to wrap up, I think, is perhaps just looking at the case. I mean, the idea was to give you all some example of the kinds of very serious, horrific situations that get reported to the committees. So, I mean, here, this poor 13-year-old girl was raped, and including by, I think it was her father. She was denied access to an abortion and then miscarried, and she was prosecuted for that. And you see from the facts, or you get some idea of the trauma that she experienced, not just from those assaults that she was subjected to by her father, but also, you might say, assaults by the state in the way in which it treated her, you know, and immediately thinking that, well, is this a miscarriage, or is this she has self-aborted, and that's a criminal act, and subjecting her to all of that. But it also raises several articles. So you can see it talks about Article 6 and 24, the right to life and health respectively. So you can get some idea of how those rights really are just picked up literally out of the text and then used by lawyers and activists to say this right has been violated. What I thought might be of interest to you or worth pointing out is how the committee is talking about re-victimization. And I think, is it this one or another one I was looking at? But certainly they often talk about that intersectionality. Oh, there we go. Yes, on the second page, which says the committee concluded that all the above amounted to intersectional discrimination on the basis of her gender, so as a female, age as a female child, ethnic origin because she was from an indigenous group, and her social status. These are all factors, and I think, I'm sorry, I didn't get to write down this person's name, maybe it was Nahida. Somebody was asking in the questions about how poverty and so on affects rights. Of course it does, unfortunately. It massively affects it, and that's why I tried to emphasize at the beginning that we are equal in rights. We're not born equal, obviously. You know, the opportunities I got as a woman being born in the United Kingdom in 1969 are very different to if I was born pretty much anywhere else in the world. I mean, in Europe, perhaps, you know, the same access to education and so on in the United States, but I could have been born to a poor farmer living in the anti-Himalayas in India. And then the access to all those opportunities that I have been very blessed, very lucky to have, would have been very much reduced. And then when we talk about how then how can you claim your rights? You know, if you don't have legal aid, or you don't have the money to bring a lawyer, or you don't have access to lawyers who will act on a pro bono basis, and that means without pay, then yes, all these things contribute. And that's why one of the things that you'll find both committees are concerned about and have issued general comments in is access to justice. So how are you able to claim your rights, or to claim that there's been a violation if you can't access the court? And that can be everything from the financial means to do so. But think about if you're a girl with a disability. Is the court door, is it wide enough to take a wheelchair? Is there a ramp for you to get the wheelchair up? If you are hard of hearing in some way, are facilities available for that? You know, it's those are the structural things, how when we've made buildings, we've not thought about how our family members, our community members who can't see too well, who can't hear too well, who don't have the same level of physical mobility that I might. And if you think about it, so often our public spaces were not made to include all those people. So, so we call it a structural discrimination, how they were just not thought of at all. And then trying to look at this summary, well, again, it gives you some idea, I hope, of the kind of issues that they're concerned about. Thankfully, there is quite a lot of talking about girls, but unfortunately, it's because of the violations that they're being subjected to. But I think you'll see that the committee doesn't really pull any punches. And if you read the reports themselves, they're quite difficult to read in terms of the language and the density and length of the documents. They're usually about 30 pages long, but they do go on and use language. But here, like, for example, in respect of Indonesia, concerned about child marriage. Anyway, I see we're coming up to nearly 12 o'clock.
Yeah,
so
I'm very sorry, Celeste. I wanted just to wrap it up on what you said, and it's a very good note to close it. And I was reminded by the Angelina Jolie quote when she was getting handed an award, and she said, yeah, I cannot imagine all the opportunities that were handed to me to get this award. Meanwhile, a woman somewhere else might not have these opportunities. So it's a very good note to be aware of what opportunities you have had just by the place where you were born, and by the socioeconomic status that you have at the moment that you're birth to life. I'm very sorry to close this session. We're gonna definitely continue it on the Mighty Network. We'll see again on tomorrow on the same time with another amazing speaker. And I'm very sorry we have to close in and go to the next session. And I hope I can find some of you there. And if not, like, please put on every question that you might have. I'll share the slides and the email of Celeste if possible, Celeste. If anyone would have any follow-up questions. For everything else, we're here, and thank you so much for joining on our first session. I hope you find it very interesting. Thank you, Celeste, for being amazing as always. We learned so much.
Thank you, everybody, and the very best of luck on your human rights journey.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Safi, and see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Take care.